Hi, welcome to Spark Change, where we look to connect, inform, and inspire you to create positive change in your life and in your community. So, today we're going to be talking about water. Specifically, we're going to be talking about water with Kris Thomas. Kris is in environmental management, and she is the MS4 coordinator for the City of Angola, Indiana. Hi, Kris. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Hey, what I'd like you to do first is what is MS4? Please define that and also a little bit about your background.
Okay, so MS4, nobody knows what MS4 stands for. It's Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And MS4 is actually a program through the EPA. It's mandated because every municipality of a certain size has to have a stormwater program. And I'll go through the reasons why that's required during my presentation. And my background, um, I have a degree in biology. I actually started off as a zookeeper and spent several years doing that and progressed into the public health field. I was in the public health field for about 20 years and decided to make a change. And here I am 6 years later, still learning. So that's my background.
Doing a fabulous job in code enforcement, may I add.
Thank you.
Well, someone's got to tell you that.
You're one.
Oh, hey, I think code enforcement is one of the most difficult things that there is out there
Yeah,
because, just because it is.
yeah, it's
And anyone who,
required. It's
yeah, it
required,
is
definitely.
required. Um, you do it well.
Thank you.
All right. So we will go ahead and start.
Okay, so as I had mentioned previously, an MS4 program is an EPA mandate. And the reason for that is because stormwater runoff has become a major issue when it comes to water quality. And I'm not going to go into any of the rules and regulations because that's pretty dry. And what I'd like to do today is just kind of give a superficial what is stormwater, what is stormwater runoff, and why do you need to be concerned about it? Because it does impact our water resources, and in particular, the recreational waters that you use to swim and play. So, stormwater pollution is a major contributor to water pollution in general. Uh, Stormwater does not discriminate. It doesn't matter where you live, in a town, at a lake, or in the country. Stormwater runoff affects all of your water resources, including the lakes, rivers, and other water bodies that we, again, use for recreational waters. So, we actually kind of need to start looking at stormwater runoff as waste. It is waste from human activity, whether it be from agricultural activity or urban activity. And we need to realize that we can reduce stormwater pollution with simple steps if we know how and we actually implement them. So I'm going to equate stormwater to wastewater. And the reason being is that whenever we flush a toilet or we use any drain in our house, you forget about it. It's out of sight, out of mind. Well, it is the same with stormwater. Once it goes away, people don't even think about it. So, again, to equate it with wastewater, once it's out of sight, something happens. It doesn't just disappear. So, we'll start with the basics. So, again, just Stormwater 101, what is it? Stormwater is understood to originate from precipitation. It typically is rain, but it can also be hail, sleet, snow, and ice melt. Stormwater encompasses more than just precipitation. It can actually be water from a hose or a broken water line. It's any natural water. Stormwater runoff is any of this natural water that does not soak into the ground when it falls. So it actually runs off. So that's why it's called stormwater runoff. It flows across the land and it makes its way to drains, ditches, and water courses. And people don't think about this, but every piece of land has stormwater runoff. You do produce stormwater runoff. If you have land, you have stormwater runoff. So where does it go? Well, in a city or a town, stormwater typically enters storm drains or roadside ditches. So the center picture here is a picture of a storm drain. The picture to the right is an outfall from a roadside ditch. In the country or in other rural areas, it makes its way to private and regulated ditches, which is the picture on the left. So farm fields, a lot of farm fields have field tiles as well. That's done to make sure that they can grow crops on land that was once wet. So those field tiles actually also drain to regulated ditches. So this is where it finally ends up. This is the destination. So stormwater, from the time it enters a drain or a ditch, it will eventually go into our recreational waters. So that's, again, why we want to be very well aware of what we're doing in our everyday life, because the big deal is when stormwater runs across the ground, it picks up pollutants. There are obviously many different kinds and sources of pollutants that can come from agriculture, and it can come from urban areas. But since I work for the City of Angola, I'm mainly going to discuss the pollutants generated in urban or developed areas. So as you can see from these pictures, the top right, you may not be able to tell, but all those little dots are actually cigarette butts. And those cigarette butts are on a parking lot. Again, a hard surface. Going counterclockwise, the blue bin with the grease stain, that's actually a dumpster, and that is grease from food waste that's leaching out onto a parking lot. As we go further counterclockwise, you can see a sheen, and that is automotive fluid that's on a parking lot that is making its way to a storm drain. And then the bottom right, you can obviously see that trash has accumulated on it. So these are sources of pollution. And these storm drains reach your recreational waters. So these outfalls that you see in these pictures, again, the one on the left, you can see there's trash accumulated in the ditch. The top, middle, you can see that's just general trash. To the right is that sheen coming out into a ditch. And then the bottom center is grease that was accidentally released into an outfall and made its way into a wetland area. So these, all of this stuff ends up in the waters that you kayak, swim, fish, whatever it may be. So that's the importance of it. And a lot of people go, why is this? How in the world can this happen? Well, the main thing that people probably don't know is that stormwater does not receive any formal treatment. Remember, we talked about sewage. Well, wastewater that comes from your home actually goes through a wastewater treatment plant. So it is run through a process where all the pollutants are removed to acceptable levels before it's released to the environment. That doesn't happen with stormwater. So whatever gets into stormwater stays in stormwater for the most part. So that's important to remember. So really, what we need to remember is we start out with natural landscapes, and we have to remember that natural landscapes are better at absorbing water. natural landscapes act as a filter, and this helps to remove the pollutants that it picks up, whether it's over natural land or developed land. So the landscapes, what you see in these pictures, this natural landscape helps both quantity and quality of stormwater. So once again, natural landscapes absorb stormwater and act as a filter to remove pollutants. Two extremely important functions. So we take this and we turn it into this. So when we develop or we change that natural landscape into an urban landscape, now all of a sudden we're looking at issues with both the quantity and the quality of water. And why is that? Well, pretty much it's pervious versus impervious landscapes. So pervious landscapes allow for the infiltration. Obviously, the grassland on the left allows for a lot more infiltration than the runoff on the right. So impervious landscapes produce runoff because we now have hard surfaces that no longer allow water to absorb naturally. So as a result, developed areas now have more water to contend with. So again, we have these natural landscapes where rainwater is able to absorb in, and we change it to hard surfaces where it can no longer do so. And this is just a graphic of how impervious landscape affects runoff. So if you look at the top left, you can see 10% runoff with 0% impervious surface. So very low rate of runoff from natural ground cover. But if we look at the bottom right, when we get 75 to 100% impervious surface, we now have 55% runoff. So dramatically increases with the amount of impervious in our urban environment. So to kind of sum up, when you have increased imperviousness, that leads to decreased infiltration rates and increased runoff rates and increased concentrations of pollutants, such as fertilizers, herbicides, greases, and oils. Those are just a few examples. So let's look at this from a local perspective. So these are aerials of land that's in Angola. The aerial on the left shows 3 undeveloped areas. So these areas allow for absorption of rainwater, snowmelt, just like we discussed. This is natural infiltration here. The same area on the right has now been developed. So now you can see we have streets, we have sidewalks, driveways, and rooftops. So now what do we do with all the stormwater that doesn't have that same area to absorb into the ground? So once we develop, we need to build storage for the added amount of runoff that no longer infiltrates naturally. So in these examples, we have areas set aside to store excess stormwater. In both photos, you'll see wet and dry detention basins that have been designed to hold the required amount of stormwater needed. So we remove, that water away from the houses to prevent flooding. In both of these types of measures, the stormwater is directed to these features for storage, but it also allows pollutants to settle out. Both of these examples are called stormwater BMPs, or best management practices, and they are left after the construction phase to continuously treat stormwater runoff. So again, we have areas where we direct stormwater to in the developed environment. So if we look at this photo, this again is an aerial, but we see the entire stormwater infrastructure. And this is the subdivisions that were on the previous. And you can see the detention areas. We have pipes, we have swales, other types of conveyances. are installed during the development to direct the stormwater to the storage areas we just discussed. So the detention basins allow stormwater pollutants to settle out. The dry detention basins release stormwater after a prescribed detention time before being released through an outlet structure. The detention time allows for pollutants to settle out. Stormwater infrastructure, all of this requires maintenance to keep it operating as intended. You can't just build this and never maintain it, or it will fail. So if it fails, then all of a sudden we have a problem again with quantity and quality of water. So from this developed area here, again, the pipes, when it does outlet, it goes to those outfalls, the ditches, the tiles that we talked about previously. So the left and the far right picture, those are outfalls within the city, and the middle one is a ditch that's out in the county. So all these, again, go to our water resources with no treatment. So one thing I would like to mention with stormwater is when we talk about stormwater, we have to also talk about the volume and the velocity that's created when we concentrate that stormwater flow. So when we concentrate that flow of stormwater runoff, we need to be aware of both the volume and velocity because it creates issues. As the stormwater is channeled and piped, both volume and velocity can increase. You can see in that center picture the amount of water and how quickly it's coming out of that pipe. And that's because it's now concentrated from areas above that that have impervious surfaces. So again, volume and velocity. The left and the right picture, you can see when we get that volume and velocity, we get scouring. And that scouring causes problems with sediment. So when that happens, we get sediment-laden runoff. You can see how this is a brown, milky color. That is sediment that's suspended, and this was after a rainfall. Now, sediment can come from various sources, but that scouring is huge, and the sediment then is carried in suspension and deposited. So when this happens, it can have disastrous effects on aquatic plant and animal life. It can cover aquatic plants, so fish are no longer able to get their food, and it can also cover egg beds. So sediment-laden runoff is a huge issue when it comes to stormwater pollution. So this is just one example of velocity and volume in action. So I just thought this kind of represented what I've been talking about. You can see how the volume is just pouring, and you can tell that it's raining, and that pipe carries stormwater from the area above, parking lots, rooftops, and it's coming down so fast that it's actually flooding the swale that it was intended to go down. Now, the problem with that is there's no time for any of that, anything that it might be carrying, there's no time for that to settle out. The other problem with that is if you don't have stabilized areas where you have vegetative growth, what's going to happen is it's going to create erosion, deep erosion over time. And you can see how highly eroded the swale became, actually washed out, and it washed all of that sediment into the bottom of what is supposed to be a dry detention basin. And when that happens, all of that sediment can now plug the bottom of that detention basin, and it will restrict the infiltrative capacity of that. So now not only does water stand longer, it doesn't do the filtering that it's supposed to do. So there can be horrible effects from the volume and velocity that's created from urban environments when we channelize that and make it go faster with more stormwater. So what does all of this mean? Well, so you can tell from these photos, these are the effects of polluted stormwater. So on the upper left, we have sediment that's gone into a wetland. In the middle upper, we have an algae bloom that was caused because of too many nutrients, maybe from fertilizer. On the right, we have obviously an oil sheen from a vehicle that was not maintained. Bottom right, we have somebody actively storing chemicals into a storm drain because they're not aware that that goes out to our local resources. And then we have the blue heron standing in the middle of another algal bloom. So all of this is an issue. And then what can we do? Well, it's very simple. We're talking about simple changes in behavior. So our everyday actions matter. And it's so easy to reduce, if not prevent, a lot of the pollutants that end up in our local waterways. And one of the easiest things to do is to keep your vehicle maintained. I'm sure all of you have been out on a parking lot and seen all of the automotive fluids that leak onto that pavement. Well, guess what? If we have a hard rainfall, it will wash that. It will flush it down the storm drains and out into ditches, which eventually end up in our local water resources. So just simple vehicle and equipment maintenance, very easy to take care of. Something else, again, very simple. Dispose of trash properly. If you dispose of trash properly, it doesn't end up in our ditches and in our water resources. The photo on the right shows trash contained. Photo on the left, all of that is going to get flushed through the stormwater system and into our outfalls, ditches, and make its way into our local water resources. So again, that's a very simple action to take. This is one that people often don't think about. Pet waste. Pet waste is a huge problem, and it really needs to be disposed of properly and not in ditches. So some figures that are out there, the EPA estimates that a typical dog excretes 274 pounds of poo per year. 274 pounds. That is a lot of dog waste. So 21.2 billion pounds of dog poo is produced in the entire US each year. 21.2 billion pounds. So why is this an issue? Well, there's too much of it, and it obviously contains bacteria and parasites. So when you don't pick it up, it can, when it rains, get flushed to our waterways. A lot of people ask, well, what about wildlife? They go to the bathroom in the woods. Well, they do, but the difference between a pet and a wild animal is that the wild animals eat resources and nutrients from its ecosystem that it lives in, and it returns that waste to the same ecosystem when they go to the bathroom. A dog eats processed food. It contains extremely nutrient-rich ingredients, and those nutrient-rich ingredients that pass through the intestinal system are deposited into nature, and those are foreign nutrients. Those aren't what's typically in that ecosystem. So these very healthy nutrients are actually nitrogen and phosphorus, and those are the same ingredients that you find in fertilizer. So when you leave what your dog does on streets, in yards, again, when it rains, that will go into our local water resources. Those nutrients can cause algae blooms, and those algae blooms use up oxygen that can then cause fish kills. And some algae is even toxic. So, what you have to remember is leave no trace. Dog waste should be immediately picked up. Take it to a disposal can, and you're good. In the City of Angola, we have our park systems, our trail systems, they have dog bags every so often with an associated trash container. Every time you pick up pet waste, it's less that can get into our water resources. So there is a big difference between the um, the excrement that wild animals put into the environment versus what a dog or a canine can put into the environment, and it has to do with that processed food. So again, chemicals, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides. We have to read the manufacturer's application directions, and I'm guilty of it too, although I am getting better at it. We have to follow what the manufacturer says should be applied for all of these. And don't apply any of this when rain is in the forecast. It has to do with right rate, right time. What results if we don't do that? Let's say we put down fertilizer and a big storm event comes and it washes all that fertilizer off. Well, it ends up in our local water resources. And again, picture on the right is a picture of an algal bloom, and you can see the fish that have died as a result of the lack of oxygen because the algae uses it up. So be careful when you're using those types of chemicals. Read the application directions. I can't emphasize that enough. Oh, that's going to go twice, I think. Let's go back one. Again, whether it's a home project or a commercial project, whether it's just mowing your grass, keep sediment, grass, mulch out of storm drains. Keep them on the project site. Keep it on your lawn. It actually acts as a fertilizer. Sediment, again, we know that can cause issues with killing the vegetation that is needed by animals, aquatic and otherwise. Grass, when that decomposes, it's organic. It will release nutrients that cause algal blooms. So, again, simple behavior changes. Be very aware of what you're doing and how you can prevent it. These are very simple actions that people can take. Something else that can be done, again, to reduce the stormwater runoff velocity and volume, we can create rain gardens. We can install rain barrels. Those will reduce the amount of runoff that reaches our local waterways. And if we reduce the volume, we reduce the velocity. We can also reduce the impervious surfaces in our yard. Um, you don't always have to put concrete down. You can put other surfaces down that will actually act to absorb that storm water. So again, very simple actions that you can do. And I just thought this was very interesting, so I thought I would share it with you. So, Ocean Conservancy's Trash Free Seas program, the top identifiable debris items in 2021. You can see the number one trash item, cigarette butts. And that goes back to that photo. Somebody just emptied their ashtray into the parking lot. This is an actual photo that I took. So 2,248,065 cigarette butts were collected. That's amazing when you think about it. Cigarette butts are the most abundant form of plastic waste in the world. Most people think that cigarette butts are made of cotton or paper, and they primarily consist of plastic. It's called cellulose acetate, which is a man-made plastic material. Littered cigarette butts can leach toxic chemicals, including arsenic, nicotine, and lead, into the environment and in turn contaminate water resources. The chemicals that are released from the cigarette butts can remain in the environment for years. Exposure to these toxins can also poison fish, and birds and animals do actually eat cigarette butts. I'm not quite sure why, but it can lead to death for those birds and animals. And there's estimates on how quickly a cigarette butt decomposes, but one study found that one cigarette butt was only about 38% decomposed after 2 years. So again, this is the most abundant form of plastic waste in the world. And people don't realize it, but we always see people emptying their ashtray onto the streets. I've seen it when people are stopped at red lights. They just empty their ashtray on the pavement. So that's a huge problem. And something else we need to consider, especially up in this area, we need to protect our wetlands. We have to work for clean water. And by protecting our wetlands, wetlands have great filtering capacity and stores a huge amount of stormwater runoff. So it prevents flooding and it helps with filtering. Unfortunately, Indiana hasn't been kind to our wetlands. We've actually reduced wetland protections in the state. In 2021, the Indiana state legislature passed a bill that further reduced protections for Indiana wetlands. And Indiana has lost 85% of the wetlands it had a century ago. So that means that Indiana now ranks 4th among states with the greatest loss of wetlands. So it's important that we contact elected officials and let them know that we do value our wetlands and they do serve a very important purpose of both water storage and water quality. Without them, I think our lakes are going to feel the effects of that. So be aware of our wetlands and let your legislators know that you care and you want them protected. And again, locally, we have built partnerships, and through these partnerships, a strategic water quality monitoring plan has been implemented to test water resources throughout Steuben County and here in Angola. By conducting a trend analysis on the data collected from water samples, we can figure out what the pollutant or pollutants of concern are and put boots on the ground to try to educate and change practices that are contributing to water pollution. So we have a lot of great agencies and organizations that are actually working to keep your water resources clean. So we're very fortunate in this northeast corner of Indiana. And one thing that we really need to get better at, we need to recycle. Use your local resources. We're fortunate here in Steuben County. We have the Northeast Indiana Solid Waste Management District. We have several locations where they accept compost and other things, the Ashley Convenience Center. In 2023, you can see how much they collected. Batteries, bulbs, liquid waste, e-waste. It's just phenomenal. For every item that gets recycled, it's one less that has the potential to end up in your water resources. So take advantage of these. It's amazing what I see people disposing of when we have these resources at our disposal. And the other thing I will mention with recycling is recycle correctly. Some things cannot be recycled. Some things can only be recycled at certain facilities. If we abuse our recycling facilities, we may not have them in the future. So please be aware of how to recycle and how to get those items where they need to be. Otherwise, they'll just end up in the landfill and it will have served no purpose. So again, all of these simple actions, all of these changes in behavior that we can, implement, it means the difference between this and this. It's that simple. We are extremely lucky to have the quality of water that we currently have, but we have had to work at it. If we don't work at it, we could end up like other countries and have huge issues with our water quality, both recreational and what we use for drinking water. So we have to be very aware. Stormwater is the #1 pollutant when it comes to our water resources, and people don't realize that. So one thing that I wanted to touch on before we get to the end is I wanted to touch on watersheds briefly. So a watershed is an area of land that channels rainfall and snowmelt to creeks, rivers, and streams into a common body of water. And everybody lives in a watershed. And Wendell Berry, was an American novelist, but he was also an environmental activist. And he came up with this phrase, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. So one thing we have to remember is that most of us live downstream from the upstream. So whatever we do upstream is going to affect those downstream. And when we talk about watersheds, so Steuben County is basically located, it has 2 major watersheds. One St. Joseph River flows to Lake Michigan. The other St. Joseph River flows to the western Lake Erie Basin. And you can see that on the left and the right where these watersheds outlet to. So one thing that a lot of people may not realize is that just outside of Fremont is actually the headwaters to the Pigeon Creek. This is the starting point, and everything from that point down contributes to the pollution. So everybody downstream from the headwaters receives whatever people from the upstream are putting into that water, and it just accumulates and keeps going into the Pigeon River, and then it eventually goes into the St. Joseph River that goes into Lake Michigan. So in Steuben County, we need to watch what we're doing, because everything we do is going to affect those people downstream, and not just in Steuben County, but LaGrange County, and as it flows on into Lake Michigan. So one thing that I wanted to make sure you were aware of is that EPA has a website. It's called How's My Waterway? And you can visit this if you are interested in finding out about a segment of river, creek, whatever that's near you. So this is an example of Pigeon Creek. And you can see that in this example, this segment of Pigeon Creek is highlighted in red. So this means that this segment of the Pigeon Creek is impaired, in this case for full body contact due to E. coli. And E. coli is a harmful bacteria that's excreted in waste from warm-blooded animals. So you can really find out how our waterways are doing locally. You can find out if they're impaired, if they're in good quality, if they're maybe impaired for something other than E. coli. This is a great website to use. And the bigger picture, again, those who are not in water resource profession may have never heard of the hypoxic zone or the dead zone. This is an area of low oxygen where life cannot be sustained because there is no oxygen. This is due to nutrients, and in 2023, this zone measured 3,058 square miles. And Indiana contributes to this hypoxic zone. Way up in Indiana, what we release eventually ends up in the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see the detrimental effects that are occurring from this. So, um, again, we are doing things to reduce our nutrient load, but every single person does can help with this. So it starts at a local level and it gets bigger than that. And we just need to be aware of what our actions um, lead to or can lead to. And this is just one more little blurb that I thought was very appropriate. The last quote is from Theodore Roosevelt, and he was obviously a president who was also an outdoor enthusiast. And we have to work towards protecting our natural resources. We don't have a choice. If not, we can end up like other countries, and that's not going to be good. That's why we do have regulations. So that is my presentation. I just kind of covered things superficially. It's hard to get into the nitty gritty with stormwater because there's just so much uh, that applies. So hopefully I didn't confuse anybody. Hopefully this made sense. You can always contact me. I'm at the City of Angola. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions regarding stormwater pollution prevention because that's what I'm here for.
That was awesome. I learned a lot. I did. I learned a lot.
Well, I hope so because again, once you do this, I never thought about stormwater. I mean, I saw a drain. Yeah, it goes down. I never really thought about where that water ends up. And it's really eye-opening because again, when you're in a certain profession, you start seeing these things that you just drove by in the past. Now it's like everywhere I go, I'm like, oh my gosh, why are they doing that? Because they don't know that it can affect stormwater. Stormwater, and again, it's not sexy. It's nobody likes to talk about wastewater, stormwater. They like to see the final product, our water resources, where they can swim. But if we don't protect it, then we're going to have an issue. So it's just, it's very important. And really trying to get the word out and get people to understand is a difficult thing to do. So, but I
yeah.
try.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, I mean, I'm going to just recap and you're going to tell
Mhm.
me if I'm wrong or anything. So stormwater is separate from our wastewater. The wastewater is the water that gets treated. The stormwater is the stuff that just runs off the land and goes into those little drains that are on the side of the road. And if we don't, we want to keep those as uncontaminated as humanly possible because those are going to go directly into our soil and directly into our water. And that's going to affect the wildlife. That's going to affect our land and eventually us if we continue to keep doing that. That's pretty much.
That's correct. Yeah. And again, we're just one municipality. So
Mhm.
what happens here is happening everywhere. So
Right.
people dumping their cigarette butts, that happens everywhere. Uh, Construction sites who don't put up appropriate erosion and sediment control measures, that happens everywhere. So it's the cumulative effect of what everybody's doing every day.
Right, and so that velocity video,
Mm-hmm.
the quantity and velocity of that water just washes away any grass or protectant or wildlife that would happen to be there that could even potentially keep that water clean, and that just runs back in just it stays barren. Is that correct, what you're saying
If
too?
you continue to have the water source. So, like two examples, the video was a construction site and they didn't stabilize properly. You can plant grass, but when you have a concentrated flow, you better have something that can withstand that flow because that pipe, when we saw that coming out of there, it's like, well, that's why the grass didn't grow because they do actually make products that are called turf reinforcement mats that will actually help keep that grass seed in place long enough to vegetate and grow to where it will be able to handle that velocity. But if you just try to plant grass seed in an area like that, it's going to get washed away. We have too much rain anymore. We have extremely heavy rain events that it just comes down in buckets very quickly. The other natural, well, it's not, some of it's natural. If we go back to those ditches where we saw the scouring, we're causing that scouring because, in that case, because volume and velocity. When we have that torrential downpour and it concentrates and it goes through those outfalls and into those ditches, it scours and it takes that sediment with it. Now, there's natural sedimentation in rivers and streams, but nothing like what we do with our actions. So, yeah, so there's several different things. Stabilization, if we can get things stabilized appropriately, it would reduce a lot of sedimentation. And we haven't even talked about agriculture and cover crops and things that agriculture can do. So it's everything. It's everything that we're doing as humans that changes the environment. So we just have to be aware of it.
So when we're talking about developments, which you had shown some subdivisions, engineering is going to be important as far as how that water
Right.
flows through that development and how it gets either stored or moved away from those houses. So partnering with the engineers on that is going to be important, right?
Right. There, when a subdivision or any development is designed, you take into account the amount of impervious surface that's part of that. And that includes streets, sidewalks, it includes everything impervious. And from that, they do calculations, and those calculations tell us how much stormwater is going to be generated and how much stormwater has to be stored. It can be stored like in uh, a wet retention pond where it will evaporate. Lots of scientific things that happen, or it can be guided to an underground detention chamber, where again you want it to sit, you want it to settle out, and then you release at a slower rate so we don't flood downstream. So yes, there's a lot of design and engineering that goes into the development of either a subdivision or a strip mall, apartment building, all of that.
Okay. I want to talk about algae blooms because we've experienced those locally, and I think one of the biggest ones that was near to us was a few years back in Toledo. Um,
Yes.
and can you talk a little bit about how that occurred, and maybe and even our local one, and what had to be done? What were the processes that happened to try to clear that up?
Well, in the case of Toledo, that again, not all algae produces toxic toxic toxins, maybe I should say. Um, Regardless of whether it produces toxins or not, it will use oxygen. Now, the one in Toledo, I believe, was toxic algae, which everybody was buying bottled water because they could not drink the water. Now, I don't know the specific conditions. It has to do with the environment, sun, rain, the right conditions, nutrients that cause those severe algal blooms. So that was huge. That was kind of like a wake up call. That's how massive that event was. Locally, we've had algae blooms, but not the majority of them, if not all of them, were not the toxic algae, which is again toxic to humans as well. But regardless of whether it produces a toxin or it doesn't produce a toxin, when you get enough nutrients into those water resources, that algae will bloom and it will suffocate the plant life, the animal life, and really make our recreational waters not conducive to what we want to use them for. So we're fortunate we have a health department that has a sonde. It's a piece of equipment that can test for a number of things, but it can actually test for uh, blue-green algae. Now, it's not the toxic variety, but if you want to check out your water, they have said that they will go out and they will test it to see what the levels are. So we're doing a lot locally, thank God, because we do have a lot of lakes in this area, which is why we have formed those partnerships. But yeah, algae, people don't get it. Fertilizers, if people would just leave their leaves, their grass on their lawn, that's natural fertilizer. You start putting phosphorus containing fertilizers, nitrogen, all of that, when it washes off, if it doesn't get taken up by the roots, it will wash off and it will go to our local water resources. So, again, read the directions, make sure that you're not applying before a rainfall. That's huge. Simple things that people can do.
Yeah, can you go over those to end that on a positive note? Because I know there's a lot of detriment that we can do, but what are the can you go over some of those? What are the great things that we can do individually to help keep our water clean?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in this profession, you realize what you're doing in a day. But like, I live in a neighborhood where they still blow their grass clippings out in the street. Simple actions, don't do that. Blow it into the lawn. Let it decompose naturally. People hosing off their driveways because they don't want dirt and debris on it. Well, they're washing that out into the street where it goes down the storm drain. All of that sediment builds up, everything builds up. Again, dog walking is huge now with our trails. Plastic bags. The majority of people I see walking their dog actually are carrying plastic bags, but you still have those who are not, and they don't realize that dogs produce a massive amount of waste. And again, it's that nutrient rich processed food that people don't realize. Because I've heard people say it. We put up that billboard about pet waste, about the poop fairy. What's the commenting on Facebook? What's the big deal? All animals. Well, yeah, but there's more that goes into it than just animals go to the bathroom. So again, just simple behavior changes. There's just so many things that we can do. Recycling is huge. I cannot believe the amount of recyclable materials that go into waste cans that I see every day. And those blow out of waste cans get over full. And what do people try to do? They try to shove it in there, and pretty soon it falls out onto, the grass or the street, and it gets into a storm drain. Those are real pictures. Those ditches with the trash in it, those are real pictures. So, cigarette butts. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people at a red light just taking their ashtray and dumping it out. And it's like, oh, if you only knew. And I guess the positive thing is people are doing it because they don't know any better. So it's a matter of educating and trying to do outreach. And it's hard because people don't want to talk about stormwater. But I think, I guess the main positive thing to take away is once people know what they can do, they're more likely to do it correctly. But again, it's getting the word out there. So that's why we do things like this.
Yeah, and so really all that stuff that goes into stormwater can eventually we could be swimming in it.
Oh yeah.
It can go into our drinking water so we could be drinking it. All of those things. It's essentially about keeping our water clean for our own health
Oh
and
yeah.
the health of our planet. Then that's everybody on it. That includes us.
Yeah, that's correct. And if people aren't aware, Google the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, and you will see a river that basically spurned the the legislation, the Clean Water Act, which part of the reason MS4s are here. our water quality back in the 60s, people didn't care. They just, everything ended up in the waterway because that was how people got rid of waste. Yeah, Cuyahoga River, Google it, because it's amazing the history of water quality in the United States. And I think as we get further along, people forget that we had extremely poor water quality. And it took years to get to that point where we can say we have good water quality. Look at other countries. We don't want to end up back there, and I don't think we will because we have regulations. Unfortunately, we have regulations for a reason because people don't know any better. That's why we regulate. But we just don't want to get back to a point where we suffer because of our actions. And that has to do with drinking water, groundwater, surface water, all water.
Thank you. So I think this is we were trying to keep it at 45, but we've gone to an hour. That's fine. That is absolutely great. And you had a lot of information, and I could talk to you about this for a very long time. But we're going to end this here. And if you could hang out for just a minute while I end this, and I will let you go, and we'll talk a bit afterwards. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So if you found this information useful, which I truly hope you do, like and subscribe to the Folia Nova YouTube channel. And you can also sign up for updates about Spark Change on the Folia Nova and Spark Change website. So with that, thank you to Kris for coming and talking about stormwater because it really is important to all of us. And also, let's all work together to make the world a little bit better. Thanks for joining us.